So at this greenhouse build, we were doing it at a separate location, so we wanted to be very sure that we had all the tools that we would need for this entire build. So I'm going to walk you through everything that we brought and just a couple tips so you don't run into trouble in the middle of your build. So starting out first, a couple levels, and you'll need this when you're hammering in your ground posts. You don't want your ground posts being crooked on either way. So while someone's hitting the ground post, it's good to have someone else checking for levelness. You'll also want to make sure that all your ground posts are sticking out of the ground the same amount. Now your ground might not be completely level, but what you can do is tie a string from end to end and use one of these little line levels to make sure that the string's level and then all of your ground posts can meet at that same string level. You'll use a sledgehammer to get those in. We have a hammer. I don't think we really need it, but it's just good to have a hammer on. A couple extra drill bits. Now we have the 1/4" drill bits, and also buy some extra 1/8 drill bits for drilling holes. These can break on you, so it's good to have backup. A couple drills. I'm gonna have one showing here, but I brought 3. It's good to have 2. Make sure your batteries are charged before you start. If your batteries die halfway through, then you gotta wait for them to charge up. A nut driver kit. Some of the bolts that we use, it's very easy to drill with the nut driver set. Knives for cutting your plastic later. These are just clamps. You'll use clamps to hold your hip board and your baseboard on while you're attaching it to the greenhouse, especially if you don't have people helping you out. And these are just some of the parts that you use. This is the ground post driver, which we have. And then this just gets rid of the bolts and parts. This is for connecting the ridge pole, all your bolts, your snap clamps, just in case you rip the plastic, putting it on, a little repair tape, and your bolts and your screws, some gloves, a ladder. We like to bring a Sawzall just in case. We don't really think we'll need it for anything, but that's just one of those extra things you bring. It's not showing here, but also a miter box, which is just for cutting wood. And that's about it.
All right, so this is what we use to cut our landscape fabric with heat so that it does not fray. When you cut it with a torch, it'll seal it. It'll seal the edges so they don't peel apart, they don't fray. And so what I have here is essentially just 2 pieces of wood. It's very simple, joined together by a hinge. And I have on the back of this just 2 simple little pieces of wood. So when it sits, it creates a little bit of an angle. So when the flame hits this side, it cuts it right nicely, right down the middle. Very simple, but this has really made our working with landscape fabric a whole lot more useful, and it's made it so that we can do it over a long period of time without edges getting bad, frayed, things of that nature.
Okay, so what we're doing here is we're getting the corners square, and what we need for that is usually 100-foot tape. The greenhouse that we're building here is 48 foot, so what we do is from top to bottom 48 foot, top to bottom 48 foot, but you also have to check diagonally to make sure it's square. Now that's not going to be a 48-foot measurement, it's going to be a little more. So when you measure diagonally, keep adjusting these left or right until those 2 measurements are the same. And once you have that, go back and double check that you're still at 48 foot. And you just kind of have to tinker with that until you have it nice and square and at the length that you need it. Alright, so here we have our 4-foot ground posts, and I'm just going to quickly go over where the holes are at and what measurements you need to make, especially if you're not getting them directly from us. You just have to drill your own holes and cut these poles yourself. So these normally come in the 10-foot lengths, the 8-foot lengths. This is what the bows go inside. So we need to make the first hole 2 inches from the top of this ground post, and that's where the hoops will connect to the ground post. And then we need to make the second hole for our baseboard. Now we don't want the hole for the bow coming in contact with the plastic. So we need to turn this ground post 90 degrees, and the holes need to be offset 90 degrees from each other. So the first hole is at 2 inches, and that's for the bow. And then we go down to the 23-inch mark, turn it 90 degrees, and that's where we put our next hole for the baseboard. Now if we go down to the 24-inch mark, that's where we're going to put a line. That's where the ground level is. So this is all going to be in the ground. This is where the baseboard gets attached, and then this is where the hoop gets attached. So here I've just laid out all my ground posts so I can mark them 24 inches from the bottom efficiently. And remember, this 24-inch mark is just where the ground level is going to be, and this is where we're going to put our ground posts in.
Alright, so what we're doing here is just burning holes for our ground posts. So instead of cutting them, we're going to burn them. This will keep the holes from fraying and tearing, and it's pretty easy. So what I'm doing, I just got a little handheld torch. There's other ways to do this with other torches, but this is what I have available, and this is what I use. And so I've marked the holes, and I'm just going through and just burning every 4 foot, which is the spacing for our poles. So I've made a mark. I'm going through and just burning it. Wear some good gloves. Put out the fire. But this will keep the holes nice, and they'll keep them intact, and there'll be no fraying. This should last for years. So this is why we've started doing it like this with everything with flame when we're dealing with landscape fabric.
So before we pound in our ground posts, we have to keep a few things in mind in order to keep everything level. We did make our mark 2 feet from the bottom of this ground post, but consider that your ground might not be perfectly level. So this line will be a little bit more like a guide than anything else. What we're actually going to use to make sure that these all are level going across the top is to use a string line. So what I did here was, to mark our corners, I put this little thing in the ground, and I measured 2 feet up from where I can tie this string on. So this is at the 24-inch mark. I'm just going to tie this around nice and tight. Now we have this line going across. We should be pounding these in until they all meet right at this line. And so when you do this, you'll find it's going to be nice and even going across the top. One extra tip that you can do to double make sure that everything's going to look nice, level, and neat is when you do your line across at 2 feet up on both sides, check it again with the little line level. These are just $1 or $2 at the big box store. Go into the middle of your greenhouse, put this level on, see where it's at. We got pretty lucky here, we're right in the middle. So this is our ground post driver, and this is what we use to drive in the poles. It will protect the top from collapsing itself in. You definitely don't want to hit a pole like that with just a sledgehammer. So this will just go in, and this is how we got ground posts in. Alright, we're getting ready to do our bend our poles with our hoop bender. There's just a couple of things we want to do to make this process go nice and easy. First, we have a measuring tape and a marker. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to mark these ends at the 9-inch mark. And the reason we do that is 2 reasons. First, we don't want to bend the part that's going to be stuck into the ground posts. And we also want to know how far we need to put each end of the hoop into the ground post. So if we mark each end on the swaged end at 9 inches, then we should have nice consistent bows once we install them. So I have these all lined up, and I'm just going to go down and I'm going to mark them all, and then we're going to take them over to the hoop bender and bend them, and then we'll put a screw in there to connect the two. So I already have a 1/8 bit here, and then just a regular Phillips head screw, and my 3/4 inch screws here. So we're here at our hoop bender, and the reason why we're using a hoop bender is because we want to save money on shipping. When you combine 2 of these poles to make 1 hoop, you no longer have to ship that on a freight truck. So your biggest line item on your greenhouse expense is probably going to be your shipping. So if we can use our hoop bender and go to your big box hardware store, the ones that are everywhere, you can easily get these poles. And again, we're using the 1 3/8 top rail for the hoops, and then the big fence rail for the ground post. And this will slide right in. And so if we bend 2 of these, it's going to make 1 hoop that we screw together. And you'll see that in the next step. Okay, so we're going to bend some poles here, and we have our pole bender, which we just attach to any really sturdy surface, which is going to be our mount. And then we have our hoop extender, so when you're bending your hoops, you have a little leverage to use at the end. And what we're using is top rail pipe, 1 3/8 inch top rail. It has this swaged end at the end, so this is what fits into the bigger ground posts. And we're going to use our line that we made before as a guide, so 9 inches from the end, and we'll kind of treat the other end the same way. We don't want the ends to be that curved because they have to fit into each other, and also into the ground posts. So right up to our line. Down about 18 inches. Make sure your pole's straight and you're not bending it side to side in any way. When it gets a little more difficult, this is when you use your extender pole. Slides in the back. That's it. Okay, now that we have the 2 bows or rails into each other, we just have to screw them together. One thing we have to be careful of is that we don't screw them on the top, because this part's going to be rubbing on the plastic. So we want to make sure we do it front facing. I usually do about an inch overlap, so an inch from the end of the female end. If you're using self-tapping screws, you don't have to pre-drill a hole, but I go back and forth on it. I find it's a little easier sometimes to just pre-drill the hole instead of losing your screw a few times. That's it. So we're getting ready to install our hoops into the ground posts, and before, a little earlier, we had marked 9 inches from the end when we were bending our hoops to make sure that we didn't bend those last 9 inches. That also gives us a guide to show us how deep it's going to go into the ground post. We didn't mark the other side, so now that's what we're going to do. We're going to mark the other end of the hoop, so we know on both sides, 9 inches down, we're going to go into the ground posts. So just 9 inches from the end of the bow. Nice mark. Alright, so we measured everything out. We made our marks 9 inches off the hoop. We put in our ground post at the mark. Now, things don't always work out so perfectly, so you have to look down, straight your tunnel. You might have to adjust the hoops in or out just a little bit to make them nice and straight, and that's what we're going to be doing right now. Alright, here we have our hoop to purl in. It goes on the bows just like this. You can see we have this already installed right here, but that's what that looks like. Washer, nut on each one, each end. Strapping this one up here. So we're bringing our 1x8 ledger board, and we're bringing 2 pieces for each side all the way down. One's going to be our baseboard, one's going to be our hip board. First we're going to attach our baseboard down at the bottom, and then before we attach our hip board, we want to make sure the spacing in between the hoops is consistent. So before we bolt in our hip board, we're going to make sure it's 4 feet between each bow. So we have our 1x8 ledger board here, and these are 12-foot pieces. We have in the directions to get 8-foot pieces, but they didn't have those at our big box store, so it really doesn't matter. You just gotta change the amount that you need. But one thing that you want to do is cut a piece off your first piece of board you use, because if it's 12 foot and you have 4-foot spacing, you don't want the board ending at a hoop, because you won't be able to notch the 2 boards together. So if we just cut about 1.5 feet off, we'll have plenty of space where we can take a scrap piece of wood and connect the boards going along that way. Alright, so we have our hole at the end of our baseboard. We'll put a washer and then our 3-inch bolt. On the other side, washer, 1/4-inch nut. So we have the washer and the nut. So the washer goes on first, and the nut. It's tight, you're set.
All right, so we've got 2 boards, and we just want to make sure the boards where we're joining them together is not at the pole, because we can't put our splice between that. And so we're gonna take a piece of wood that we cut off and use it as a splice, screwing it from the back side of the board so that this stays flush. So what we're doing here is we're measuring the center for our hip boards, which is at 36 inches. I've made a mark here for that, but then what we did is we took our board that we're using and we've taken half. This is a 7-inch board. We've taken half of it, so I'm going to measure down 3.5 inches. 3.5 inches, and make a mark for the bottom of the board. So I'm going to align I'll go down and do that all the way down, and I'll be aligning the bottom of the board with the bottom of that mark. That will be where the board will be set.
So right now we're drilling in the hip board, and where I'm drilling just below center, because we want to consider when we put our channel up later, we want that to be generally right in the middle of the hip board. So I'm just drilling from this side all the way through the pole, and then we'll put our carriage bolt in. And we provide 4-inch carriage bolts. You don't need 4-inch carriage bolts, but some people like to use 2-inch thick wood for their hip board, so we just have a little extra hanging out here. Probably utilize this for something, even like a little trellis, some string. Alright, so here we're going to connect the bows to the ground posts. If you're using the pre-drilled ground post, you've already have your hole here, so we'd actually need to drill through the bow in order to go all the way through so we can put our bolt in. Here we're using the 2-inch hex bolt, washer, and nut. I've already drilled through here, so I'm just going to stick the bolt in, use my washer, nut, just tighten. So here I'm pre-drilling holes into the channel. And a time-saving tip is just take your 10-pack that's all together already, stack them, just drill your hole right all the way through there. I'm going about every 12 to 18 inches. If you're in a higher wind area, definitely go at least every 12 inches. Because the plastic's going to be putting a little outward pressure on that channel. So closer the better if you're in a high wind area. Otherwise, 18 inches would be just fine.
We're putting on the channel for the bottom. Putting on the channel for the bottom rail. So I'm just making sure it's lined up and it's roughly level with the board. And we're just going around, and I put a screw on here, make sure it's lined up good, and then I go to the other end and put on the screw down here. Make sure it's roughly level, and then put the screw in. We put about a screw every 1.5 foot, so there's per 6 foot section or 6.5 foot section, we've got about 5 screws in there. So we really make sure to put it in there. It'll get a lot of torque, especially with heavy winds. So we want to make sure it's really fastened down well. So that's what we're doing right now. It's just fastening, finishing out the bottom board with the channel.
All right, so we're getting ready to attach our baseboards for our end walls. What we have here is a 2x6x12 for our 12-foot wide greenhouse. And all we're going to use for this is a 4-inch carriage bolt, washer, and a nut. So we're going to continue the construction of our end wall. Now, we already put on our baseboard. What we're going to do next is measure for our door frame starting at the top. So if we wanted a 36-inch wide door frame, cut that in half to 18 inches and mark 18 inches from the center on both sides. So we'll do that first. Now that we've done that, let's take our piece of wood. It's going to be the sides of each door frame. Line it up here. Make a little mark at the bottom. Make a little mark at the top. Right here, we're just about flush at the top, so I'll just take the corner off. What we're going to do with this mark is where the bow is at. We're going to measure 1 3/8 inch in this way. We're going to notch this out, because that's going to notch out where our bow's at. And that's going to give us the ability to put a bolt in the back of this piece of wood to attach it to the end wall bow here. So I'm going to cut out this notch, 1 3/8 inch, and I'll be back to bolt this on. Alright, so next we did the door header. All we did was measure up about 81.5 inches from the bottom. We're going to have a door that's about 80 inches, so we want to give a little space at the top and a little space at the bottom. So we just came in from the sides and put some screws in. Alright, so we're finishing off our door frame here. We're going to add a little support to the side, give a little area for the wiggle wire channel track. All we need to do is just put this board up against the bottom of your baseboard, make a mark right here. We're going to cut all that above. We'll come back, these will be attached on the sides, each side of the door. We can put our wiggle wire track right on this door frame.
All right, so what we're doing here is we're attaching the channel to the end walls to hold the plastic in place. And so what I've done is I've fastened the channel with a clamp, and I'll be putting a Tech screw in the bottom. Okay, and then I'll be pulling this over and screwing in a screw about every 2 feet as I work my way over the pole. This helps sometimes if you have 2 clamps. You can work another clamp up here and then just hold it down, but this way works fine too. Okay, and as you see, it'll work its way all the way up the pole until it connects in to the other one. So we'll keep working it up. All right, so here we have our channel. It's nicely attached to the end pole, and this will give us a very secure foundation for the plastic when we attach it on the end.
Alright, we've just finished our end walls and now we're getting ready to put on the plastic. It's a windy day outside here where we're at, so we want to do everything that we can to make sure that the plastic's not going to be on without the attachment for as little time as possible. So what we've done is we're going to be doing the roll-up sidewalls. We have all of our 10-foot 3/4 inch conduit lined up, and then we have our couplers, and we make our own couplers because we'd like to be able to drill all the way through, and that keeps the conduit from slipping, which will make your sidewall uneven over the long term. So we're just going to drill the self-tapping screws into our conduit, and then we're going to have all of our snap clamps lined up because when we put on our plastic, everything will be here ready to start rolling up alongside. To install your film, first roll it out the length of your greenhouse. Look for the marking that says inside. Before we unravel it completely and drag it to the other side, make sure that marking inside is going to be able to be read normally from the inside of the greenhouse. Start by securing your plastic at one end of the high tunnel by putting wiggle wire starting from the top of the ridge pole going down to your hip board. Once you have the first end done, then go to your other end and do the exact same thing. And now we want to roll the 3/4 inch EMT conduit for the sidewalls to not only hold the plastic down in the high winds, but then to create some tension so then we can install our wiggle wire on the hip board next. But first, when we roll up that EMT conduit, we want to get that nice and tight so it's tight about an inch above the ground. It's an inch above the ground, and that's when we put our snap clamps on. So do that for both sides, and then we can put our wiggle wire on. Okay, so here we have our hand crank for our roll-up sidewalls. All we did so far is we attached the handle here, and we put the other end inside of our EMT conduit. We haven't even drilled that in yet, but we will. And here, this is just a 1/2 inch pipe, which we're going to drill into the ground. Then we bend this 3/4 inch pipe with our pole bender, so it's the same arch as the greenhouse. Once we put this into the ground, this is just going to slide over. We'll put a couple screws in there, and that's going to be our guide rail for the hand crank. So we're working on the hand crank for the sidewall. We attached the bolt right here. We took a 1/4 inch bit, and right between the 3/4 inch mark and the 1 inch mark is exactly where you want to drill into your 3/4 inch conduit. Drill there, your holes with the winch will line up perfectly. You'll be able to get that bolt right in. From there you can start rolling up. Here next, we're going to get our guideposts in. You notice that we have our conduit extending out past the greenhouse. I like to go about 1 foot past, just so your hand cranks are a little not right up against the wall here. And you want to put that conduit, pretty close to the side of the greenhouse, so you don't have extra airspace coming in this way. So here, I'm put my 1 inch guide first, then my 3/4 inch guide, which I bent partially with the pole bender, is going to go right over top of this, just like that. First, I'm going to pound this into the ground a little bit so we have a nice sturdy rail. Should be able to slide this right on. See how it contorts to the bend of the greenhouse? Here, I flip this up. Put a screw in down at the bottom to make those two pieces connect. Here, I'm basically ready to roll this up. Once our sidewalls are finished, we can finish putting our plastic on. Just put your plastic on the end walls, just like you did the plastic to start with. You can put another layer of wiggle wire in your channel here and just make it nice and tight. And once this is done, now we can attach our screen door. And we bought this screen door at the big box store. It was nice and easy. We just hung it up with some hinges. Alright, so we just finished a build of a 12-foot greenhouse at Titus's house. This is a 12 by 48 foot structure. Took us about 3 half days to finish it, and we did the roll-up sidewalls on this one. We did a door on only one end of it. That's just because how he wanted it. But you could do no sidewalls. You could put doors on both ends. You can put insect screen, shade cloth. Really, the options are basically unlimited. What we're doing here is just building a structure and customizing it to our needs. So we have the wiggle wire in the channel. Keep the plastic on. Then we use the just a screen door here from the big box store that was really easy to put on. We have the landscape fabric down here. These were the poles that we bought from the hardware store. Then we have the wiggle wire in the channel on top of that. This is the hand crank. This is the EMT conduit. This is 3/4 inch EMT conduit. And we use snap clamps here to hold this. Be able to roll up the plastic. And then coming inside, see, it's nice open space now. We used our pre-cut ground post here, our bolts, our hoop to purlin connections, and you know, down here, if you wanted to keep these vents open all year long, you could definitely put insect screen down there. It's quite easy to do, even still. You know, again, it's all up to your local environment here. This is a 12-foot wide high tunnel, so it's 8.5 feet high. The wider the high tunnel, the taller it gets. So 10 foot's about 7.5 feet tall. The 20 foot's about 10.5 feet tall. Now, a high tunnel is set up very well to do a lot of things. You could do raised beds in here. You could have dirt in here, grow bags, trellis tomatoes with Dutch buckets. I mean, you've seen it all. Anything you could do in a greenhouse, you can really do in a high tunnel. Again, you can control a lot of things. You can have fans in here. You can close all of this off during the winter and do double layer plastic, blow that air in between, and really keep an insulated space in here. So it's really a good year-round, all-climate option. You really just want to cater a few things to your particular needs. So, you know, this is a nice wide open space. You can really measure the inside and plan ahead in one of these things. And you know, it didn't take us very long to get this up. So if you're trying to build and scale quickly for a very efficient cost, this is a really good option. So we bent all of our own poles, and by doing that, you know, we can expand, you know, for as little dollar as possible by going to the big box store and just getting your poles locally. You know, it only took us about an hour to bend all of the poles for this. So you can save yourself hundreds of dollars by just, you know, an hour or two of work there. So you know, the options are fruitful. You can do a lot of things here, and you can see there's a lot of room to work with here. We're pretty excited to see what this looks like in a couple months.